This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. This week, we're revisiting an incredibly important topic that we haven't touched in a couple months, opposition research. John Lapp of Intel's joined us back on episode 18 to talk about the topic, but there's a lot more that we could talk about in just one episode. So this week, Willis Jones of Capital City Research is here to discuss some of the biggest takeaways he's learned from over 20 years of work in the business. Willis is based in Missouri, but does work for Republican campaigns in a number of states. His mission is to arm their clients with every piece of information possible. But that's really only part of it. They really do a lot of work to help interpret the data as well and show how it can be weaponized during the campaign. Good opposition research and rock-solid vulnerability studies are incredibly important to any winning campaign, and I'm really stoked to have Willis here to talk about those subjects. Willis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Raz, for having me.
Well, it was great to get connected with you, and I've really enjoyed looking over some of the stuff that you provided me, some of the templates and the example work product that you do. It's really cool kind of reading through some of that and how specific you guys are. But before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this subject, let's get to know you a little bit better. Kind of tell the listeners about your background, where you come from, how you got hooked into politics, and where opposition research came into your career.
I'll be glad to do it. I originally come from a small town in southeast Oklahoma named Stigler, Oklahoma, and I wound up going to College of the Ozarks outside Branson, Missouri. And how I got involved in politics and opposition research is one of my academic advisors at school knew that I had a big interest in conservative politics, and he brought me two pieces of information. Folks looking for interns. This is way back in 1995.
Just a couple years ago.
A little while back. And one thing showed the internship was going to be an unpaid internship for working for a state representative here in Jefferson City, Missouri. The other internship was going to pay me $500 for the whole entire semester, working for the House Republican Campaign Committee. And they said that I was going to be doing research and, other errands as needed. And me being a poor college kid, I went for the $500.
Smart man.
Not really knowing what I was really getting into. And I started, doing that, and it was something that, wow, I really like this. And I think I'm pretty good at it. And other people started to think so too. But I had different jobs off and on, but all through that period, I was still, working on research for different various folks. But the bulk of my time, how I got started in politics and started building a name for myself, I worked for a consultant by the name of David Barklage. A consultant of St. Louis, and he's a really dear friend to me and a mentor to me, and still work with him on several projects to this day. But it just started getting to a point where I started having other people, through word of mouth, started asking me for my services, and I just started, just kind of growing from there, and I founded Capital City Research back in 2014. And it was like a light clicked on in my head, in 2015. I was having people come to me by word of mouth. I'm like, wait a minute, why should I rely on just word of mouth? Why don't I just start, being more proactive and start marketing myself? And, the business has really picked up. I now have 5 people that work for me, helping put things together for me. And we've worked on races in the past 2 to 3 years, from Washington State all the way to Florida, New Hampshire to Arizona, and everywhere in between. And we've been able to do this by providing solid opposition and vulnerability research and at very reasonable prices compared to most competitors of ours nationwide. And
that's really cool.
My philosophy is real simple: just keep people happy and give it at a price that they could afford.
That's a good way to go, especially in politics, where it seems like a lot of consultants have the opposite philosophy. So it's really cool to hear about your story of getting your business going. And you know, a lot of our listeners, the ones that aren't candidates, many of them are people that want to work in politics. And I always like to be able to make sure they hear the different paths that people take. You know, in my case, I started knocking doors when I was 10 for a friend of my parents who was running for office, and I got hooked on it. And I've worn a bunch of different hats over the years. But most of our guests that come on here that are consultants or campaign staff, it's just always neat to hear how different their backgrounds are. We've probably had 20 or 30 of those kind of folks on here, and we've got 20 or 30 different stories, all different. And my hope is that the listeners that are wanting to get in, they'll actually hear that, and hopefully be heartened by the different options and different crazy opportunities that are out there. And I think you're right that when you come into this, you're willing to put your head down and work hard and focus on delivering a good product, and you making sure you keep your clients happy, that over time, both word of mouth and opportunities for broader growth are going to present themselves. And that's definitely been my experience in politics and the consulting side, and yours as well. Let's move over a little bit, because I'm talking into the meat of this. So let's start off by kind of getting your explanation of why you think opposition research is important and how it's ideally going to help a campaign. And let's look at both the opposition side and the vulnerability kind of at the same time, because they're kind of flip sides of the same coin.
Sure. Opposition research, in my opinion, is absolutely critical to a campaign. You have to know what your opponent is about. You have to know, if they've been in public office before, how they voted on particular issues, if they've been in business, their business record. Everybody is as different as our fingerprints. Everybody's unique, and opposition, if you don't know your opponent, you're going into war blind. And being able to know what your opponent is about helps you draft your message. So that kind of folds into a vulnerability research, why that is important as well. Again, if you don't know your opponent, you're going in blind. And if you do know your opponent, that helps build your entire campaign. When you have a completed research packet for myself or someone else that provides this information, provided they do it right, you're going to know everything there is to know about your opponent. How they've registered to vote and their public record. If they've been sued or have had tax liens or filed for bankruptcy or been arrested, or things that they have said on social media and news articles and everything like that. And if the particular thing that you find vulnerable, you base that, you frame your campaign around that. And I'll flip over to why vulnerability studies are important. I think vulnerability studies, as you had mentioned previously, is at least as important, if not more important, than finding out about your opponent.
Right.
I'll give you an example. Way back in the early 2000s, I was working on a state senate campaign, and it was a special election, and the person that was running for office, we had what we call, quote unquote, the conversation with the candidate, like, is there anything we need to know? Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I'm all's good. I'm a good family man. I got a wife and 4 kids, and all's good. And like 10 days out, and we just kind of took him at this person's word. And 10 days out before the election, the Democrats did do their due diligence and research on him, and he had like 3 or 4 DWIs that he didn't tell us about. And
yeah, that'll hurt you.
That was all she wrote.
Right.
And that's how I learned the hard way on the need for a vulnerability study on the person that you're working for.
No joke.
Like, let's say that you find that on your opponent, let's say they voted to relax drunk driving laws. had we known about this person's vulnerabilities, we wouldn't have attacked the Democrat on
right.
Being weak on drunk driving.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the people I've talked to, especially during the era of Obama, especially in conservative states, people were able to tag Democrats. He supports Obama, and a lot of times that was successful enough to win the race. But there's other districts that weren't so conservative. You have to have a lot more information besides, he's pro-Obama, he's pro-Hillary Clinton, or she's pro-Obama and Hillary. I mean, you have to have detailed, specific information.
Yeah.
He or she, votes to increase your taxes, or while he or she doesn't pay their own. The more specific information you have, and the quicker you're able to have it, the more successful your campaign's going to be.
Right.
And the people that have good opposition research, at least the people that I've worked with, my clients, the vast majority of my clients win. And it's in good cycles and in bad cycles. When you have good, solid, bulletproof information to go with, that helps everything. And with good research, that helps build the rest of your campaign. That helps the pollster, write up questions.
Mm-hmm.
That helps the media people draft ads. That helps the fundraising people, put together fundraising memos like, hey, are you sure you want to vote for someone who's increased your taxes 61 times?
Yeah. Well, it gives a lot of specifics to where we're no longer talking about generalities. We're no longer saying, he's soft on crime or he's pro-abortion. We got specific numbers. We can say this man voted 57 times while in the state house to make abortion easier for people to get and easier for the doctors to kill children. You actually have numbers, and that makes it so much more powerful. You can be specific. And when it comes to the vulnerability side, like you said, it's going to make a big difference. As a consultant, you're going to give different advice to your client if you know they have a specific vulnerability. If you know they have a bankruptcy 5 years ago, or that they had DWIs 6 months ago, you're going to give different advice. And I always think that's one of those. That's something that should be done as early as possible, right? I actually like doing it during the exploratory phase prior to launch. Because there's plenty of stuff out there like those DWIs where you might just advise a candidate not to run. You might say, look, you're great in a lot of ways, but you got some very specific vulnerabilities here. They will be used against you. Your reputation will suffer. Your family's going to suffer. And there's somebody better that has a better shot at taking this race. So you need to step aside. And either way, whether it's telling them to get out of the race or just knowing what your path to victory looks like, it's part of, I use a lot of looking at military strategy and politics is very similar. And it's just kind of some good old Sun Tzu, looking at knowing where your opponent is strong and where he's weak and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if you're not very, very aware of how those match up, then you can't put together a good battle plan. And with the right research packet,
agreed,
especially when it's not just data points, it's actually you actually have a good firm where, much like the work you do, where you're able to go through and tell them, hey, this is what he did and this is what it means. In the sample packet that you sent over to me, I was looking through and seeing, in this one case, this Democrat state rep, he was running for state senate, and he had hundreds, like nearly 1,000 absences from committees and floor votes. Right. And so you went through and not only logged what those were and what some of those important issues were to the district, so you could point out, well, this is really important to you. Well, he decided it was more important for him to go study for law school on your dime while this vote was being cast. He decided to miss that. And he broke those down by type of vote, by the year, by all those different things. All that done, I mean, it's very, very time consuming to do all this, right? But the campaign gets to have a fully digested report that you can go through there and see what are the ones that we want to have poll tested. Are there things that we know already are really important to the district that are big red flags? And even when they don't have, in this case, the guy's background was clean, his military record was good, he had no bank liens, no late taxes, no lapses in voting history, all those things. But his voting record was his liability, and you were able to go through there with a fine-tooth comb and identify all these different weak points where he did not line up with the district's values. And so you're not just talking in generalities. You have specific talking points that you get to test and get to use when you're talking to voters, and that's huge.
Correct. Now, let me go back on the vulnerability studies. Now, there have been conversations I've had with clients, and I advise them, you probably don't need to run for office, but those vulnerability studies, you were mentioning about bankruptcy. One of the clients that I've had, he had a bankruptcy on his record, but we knew about this more than a year before the campaign, before the election. But we were able to frame this person's campaign to where, hey, look, he's a small businessman. He knows what it's like to struggle like you do. He wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. And he's going to go there and represent you because he knows how difficult it is to deal with government regulations and excessive bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And we were framing his campaign to inoculate him against what we knew would be a real brutal attack on him.
Right.
And because we were able to frame it, we were able to insulate him from that attack. And this person is sitting in a legislature right now, and he was successful in turning back the Democrat attack.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of my
had
favorites,
that information on himself.
Well, one of my favorite examples of not inoculating yourself to known things is George W. Bush during his first presidential run with his DWI,
mm-hmm.
and that was something that Karl Rove knew about from day one, and they both said since then that they wish they would have come out with that and just kind of they would have done a controlled detonation on that early in the campaign before they built up the whole trust, help is on the way stuff, that they would have got that out there, because as
Correct.
it was, it very nearly derailed his candidacy and likely cost him the popular vote there in 2000, because
mm-hmm.
It was finding out about that in October versus a year and a half prior. The difference in the framing and how his candidacy, what people believed about him, was huge. But had he come out with it early on, it would have been at his in his timing, and he would have been able to tell the story of how it changes, how that literally changed his life. And it could have been one of those things where people really didn't care about it because of how he told the story and how he was able to frame that issue. But it very nearly meant we had a different president, had Al Gore in there, because they
mm-hmm.
decided not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's things that you learn from my 20 plus years of working in politics on the research end. I mean, there's things you learn, there's mistakes that things are made. I mean, not so much as far as the accuracy of the work, but how it's implemented into the campaign. And it's kind of like a lawyer practicing. The more experience you have, the better you're going to be. And that's what we bring to our clients is we've been at war, more than 20 years. We know what it takes to take a person to victory.
Mm-hmm.
Do we win 100% of the time? No, but it's north of 70% over the past 20 years, and people don't hire my firm for a race that's going to be super easy. They hire us because they're in trouble or they're afraid they're going to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So good work and good research wins campaigns time and time again.
Well, and going back to the vulnerability study thing, a lot of the time, much like that candidate where the DWIs came out for you, most of the time when you had that first conversation and you say, okay, so what's out there? What are they going to attack you with? Most times the candidates don't have a good answer. The vast majority of them are like, I'm a pretty good guy. I don't have any second family sitting off over here, and I don't have I don't really have
mm-hmm.
big bankruptcies or anything, and I don't sleep around on my wife or commit sexual assault. They look at those types of things. And that's great if they
right.
don't, right? But the problem is
sure.
There's so many things that you can be attacked on that don't have to do with you being a jackass or doing illegal activity. There's a lot of things that you can be attacked on, or that, as you mentioned, you wouldn't be on the offense about if you knew of. And so having that third-party vulnerability assessment is really to help check the candidate's memory and to make sure that you get to look at it through the view of a voter or the opposition rather than just the candidate. Because in most cases, these are decent people who think they made pretty good choices. There's some rationale behind what they did and when they did it. And so much of the stuff in their past, it doesn't have a big flashing red light above it that says, hey, this is a liability. But that's through their own self-justified thought process, right? So we got to look at it through the lens of a voter or somebody who wants to attack us and take us down. And so we have to be able to go review that stuff from a third-party side and come back and say, okay, well, here are those things that you thought were perfectly fine and in good faith, and maybe they were the right decision, but yet you're going to be attacked on them. You voted this way, or you missed that thing because you missed an important vote because it was, you were sick that one time. Well, we need to get the doctor's note because they're going to attack you because you're saying you care about this, but you missed this vote. We better get the doctor's chart and prove that you were on your deathbed that day.
Right.
There's those types of things that if you know about ahead of time, you can prepare for. But if you don't, then you're going to be opening yourself up to huge liabilities. And the beauty of having that information, one thing is you're able to prepare a response. If you know you're going to get attacked on something, you're not going to wait until the day that they drop it to start preparing a response. You're going to have something in the chamber, locked and loaded, ready to go, and you're waiting for them to attack. And that's where you get to decide, is this something I want to set off preemptively, or is this something where I wanted to wait on it and wait for them to attack so that I can counter?
Yes. I tell you something on the vulnerability studies, where there's two things that come to mind that people completely forget about or wouldn't have given a second thought to, is one, how often they voted, and two, whether they paid the property taxes on time.
Yes.
And I've seen so many campaigns that we've been on where we've found this information on the opponent, and they just weren't expecting, where they were late 10 times on their property taxes. I mean, I think most people want to pay their property taxes, and but sometimes, as busy as people get, sometimes slips their mind, they pay it late.
Yeah.
But that's one way where we're able just to really bang on people is that. And especially for people running for office for the first time, maybe they weren't very politically involved until they started running for office, and maybe they only voted in general elections. And we make the case a lot, you didn't vote in a primary, you didn't vote in the presidential primary, you didn't vote in a local race. I mean, what's wrong with you? I mean,
they oftentimes run saying, I'm running because I care so deeply about these things, and we've got to have people stand up and fight. And you're like, well, okay, where the hell you been the last 10 years? You voted in one primary and 3 generals, and if you really cared about it, I mean, you obviously are making something up or just telling us what we want to hear because you didn't care enough to drive down the street to the polling location, one day out of every 700 the last couple years. And so that is a perfect example of just an easy layup of a hit.
And I'm surprised at how many times we will do our vulnerability studies on our people and find things like that when our opponent doesn't think to look. Right. There's some times that they do, but there's a lot of times where whoever they're hired, they don't. And I understand why, campaigns are usually tight on money, and they're trying to find ways to, cut down costs and, save for those media buys and so forth. But I'm not saying it's just because I'm an opposition researcher and I have a vested interest in them spending money on research. But research is an area where you should not cut because that helps you with your big media buys where you spend most of your money on. If you have good research, your ad buys, your advertising is going to be 10 times better than it would be if you're flying in there blind.
Yeah, it's a force multiplier when it comes to all of those different voter contact spends because it's going to change what you're asking about at the door, potentially change what you're asking about the door. It's going to change what your messaging talking points are on your website, on your push cards, on your mailers, on your TV and air war stuff. I mean, it has the potential to do a lot just from a basic communication strategy perspective. Now, so let's talk about the cost side a little bit because there's widely varying costs across industry depending on vendor and depending on the time involved. Are there any standard pricing ranges that some of these candidates from city council to federal level that that they fall into, or what are most candidates looking at when they're thinking about what this is going to cost?
My prices start, for someone that hasn't run for office before, that don't have much of a public record. I have packages starting as little as $1,000. Where my median pricing point, someone that may have served a few terms in the state house looking to run for another office, my packages run between $2,500 or $3,000 on something like that. But I price each project individually based on the amount of work involved. There's some congressional races where I've priced less than I price like a judicial race.
Yeah.
Because in a judicial race, I'm having to go to the courthouse and pull file after file after file, and sit in some conference room for days at a time, or having myself and staff members help me. It's just a lot more laborious and tedious. So my late grandpa was a general contractor, and I learned a lot from just how to run business in general, and I just price it based on the amount of work involved. And what I'm finding when I talk to people around the country, like, they find it actually refreshing, because a lot of people that compete against me, they price it based on the level of the race.
Right.
They'll charge more for a U.S. Senate race than like a city council race. And I get that most of the time. There's a reason why they charge that much, but but I price it based on the amount of work involved, not necessarily on the level of the race.
Right. Well, and that makes a lot of sense, because we're not just talking about you don't just have some web portal where you plug it in and say, okay, give me all the data about this person. That's not the way this works. But I think that's the way a lot of people, in this digital age we live in, that they just assume that that's somehow this is either, it's all out there, we just don't know the right search terms, or that you got a special search engine, and you do. But there are a lot of these things you're having to go to the courthouse, you're having to dig through documents, stuff that's not digitized, or that you have to go view in person or go down there. Even a lot of county records offices, they have all their stuff on a system where you have to actually go there physically, even to view it on their computer system. I was recently helping out with a race, and I went down to our local courthouse and was having to pull up court records and go through those and print them off there, because we couldn't do it. It was all digital there, but I couldn't access it from my computer. So there's a lot of physical time, and that even is before you start getting into looking at how you turn this from just a list of data points into an actual assessment where you can tell them how this can be used. And the example is, in my mind, is looking at the example that you sent over to me. There were hundreds, if not thousands, probably thousands of votes that you went through, that you had to comb through to try to find what are the ones where he was on the opposite side of where our candidate is, or where he's standing up for values not represented by this new district. And that's where somebody has been in the public eye and run for office before. That's where the work is going to be a whole lot more for them, because there are search engines where you can go look up those for most states, but you actually have to digest the information in order to figure out what it means and how it can be applied to the campaign.
I've seen there's a lot of people that do a really good job at what in my field, but I've noticed what people have told me is that, let's say I put together a 40-page packet for someone. What I've heard a lot of people say is that a competitor of mine might have a 100-page packet, but they find my 40-page packet a lot more digestible and a lot more usable, because I summarize it and I categorize it by issue, and I have a summary as to here's how you need to use this, and they find it a lot easier to work with and a lot more bang for their buck.
Yeah, after looking through your sample, that was pretty clear that there's a whole lot of work that goes into that, and it's not just a search engine printout. It's a lot of specific digested data that you and your team put through it, and that's what good opposition researchers do, right? That's the idea. There are other vendors that are solid out there that do it, but that's one of the biggest things you can look at is how quickly can I leverage this information for my campaign. is this something that I can hand off to my pollster or my communications guy or my speechwriter or my canvassing team and get this information that we just got out in the field quickly? Because most campaigns, they don't have the extra staff time to be doing secondary research or fact checking. They got to know that what you hand them is 100% accurate, that it's well sourced, that you guys did hard work on it, and that you've got digested information that's ready to go in the field.
Now, on that note, what you're mentioning, one of the services we provide, after we put a packet together, it's not like we put a packet together like, hey, here we go, see you later. We're with the
Right.
campaign up till election day. Mm-hmm. And if they have questions or like, are you sure this is right? We have no problem with double checking and making sure that what we have in there is 100% accurate, because the last thing that we want to have happen is a candidate be called out for something false or
Right.
even get sued. So that's a service that we provide. Any questions that our candidates or our consultants or whoever's on their team, whatever they have, we're just a phone call or an email away, and we will guide them through whatever questions they have.
So when you look back at 20-some years of opposition research, I'm sure there are more than a couple examples that pop in your mind as far as kind of some of your favorite war stories and examples of when things went south, or when you're able to find something that made a definitive, made a big difference in the outcome of the race. You got any of those you want to throw out there?
Yeah, I mean, I won't mention specific names, but there's one that comes to mind. He was advertising himself as the taxpayer watchdog, and he had been in elected office already and had a lot of support. And the guy that we were representing, we thought that our candidate was the underdog, because this other guy is a very likable guy, a real backslapping type of guy. But he's like, I'm going to be the taxpayer watchdog. I'm going to watch out and make sure that we're going to hold government accountable, and that sort of thing. But we started digging around, and he'd had $63,000 in unsatisfied tax liens. And so what? Yeah, and that race went from being a toss-up to where our candidate won 2-1.
Right.
And one in this past cycle, there was a gentleman that said that he was a doctor, and I put that into our packet. I put quotation marks around the doctor because we couldn't find any evidence of where he was a doctor, whether it be, he wouldn't claim to be a physician, but he's claiming that he had like a doctor of philosophy, a doctorate of ministry, and this person was a pastor. Mm-hmm. He could not find any evidence of where he had his doctorate from. And so I had one of the people that worked for me, like, call down to this guy's office and make a story that I'm interested in this state's politics, and I'm working on a paper to find out more about state politics, and I find your story very interesting, and I told this person to ask him, where did you get your doctorate from? So this person asked, and they actually got a hold of the candidate themselves. We were expecting to get a hold of campaign staff or something like that, but
right.
They actually got a hold of the candidate, and they asked him, like, they just wondered, where'd you get your doctorate from? And he just went ballistic, said, how dare you ask a question like that? You're a Republican plant, and, how dare you, and just went off, for like 5 minutes. And so we made a note, like, well, we can scratch off the doctor. Because most people, when you ask them where they got their education, they don't have a problem saying that. But,
it's kind of a simple question.
This guy got and, there's times where I'm having to go to local courthouses or school boards, city councils, places like that where the records aren't digitized, and especially in a small town, word gets around that someone's snooping around on their favorite person. And,
yeah.
They just start drilling. Why do you want this? Who you with? That type of thing. And one example comes to mind where I was looking through school board records, and this person was on a school board for 12 years. It was in the suburbs of St. Louis, and this lady that was in charge of the records, she was coming up with every excuse in the book to, we don't have time to let you look at that. No one's ever looked at these records before. Why do you want to look at that? They're extremely defensive. But I even had a lawyer draft up a letter like, you will abide by the Missouri Sunshine Law or else. She buckled after that. But I was in there for 3 days, and this lady was just staring at me the whole entire time, with her arms crossed and giving me the evil eye for 8 hours a day. I'm like, wow,
that's impressive.
I could tell that she wanted me out of there, but we found some good stuff, and that helped our client go to victory by like 150 vote margin out of like 50,000 votes cast.
Wow.
It was actually a Democrat-leaning district, but our candidate was able to pull it off. But you, as an opposition researcher, you have to be strong-willed. You cannot be intimidated easily, or you will fail in this business.
No doubt about it. Well, I'll tell you what, Willis, as we're wrapping up here, what you got any final words of advice for folks, for candidates, or for even anybody interested in getting into opposition research or going to work for somebody?
I got a couple words of advice for candidates. Do not cut opposition research out of your budget. You don't necessarily have to use me. We'd love for you to use me, but my company, but whoever you're using, don't cut that out of your budget. It's a critical part of your budget. That would be like skipping on oil changes to save money. If you don't spend money on the oil changes, you'll destroy your car. And if you don't spend money on opposition research, it's usually between 2 and 5% of a budget, if not less. That's an area you don't want to cut. And on opposition research, people that want to get started, I have people help me, go through votes, and some of the work is tedious and it gets boring at times, but there's times where you find that silver bullet and it makes it all worth the while. So if people want to look to get into this business, be willing to work hard. And I find so many people in their early 20s, want to get a glamour job immediately out of college. And for most folks, that's just not going to happen. You have to be willing to put in the work, and you have to be willing to do whatever is asked of you to show, how hungry you are to be successful in this business, not just in opposition research, but in any aspect of working in politics. You work hard, you work smart, you find good people to work for, you find good mentors to mentor you.
Absolutely.
And if you're patient and you work hard for years, you will, and be patient and keep at it, you will be successful.
Mm-hmm. You're 100% right. I absolutely like that. Yeah, that's been my experience, and it always breaks my heart when I see folks that are graduating college or something, and they're the only thing they can see wanting to do in politics is getting on Fox News or on they want to be in front of the camera, and it's like, okay,
right,
maybe get that opportunity, but I find that I've seen more than a few examples of folks that even the few that do get to achieve that flame out quickly because they didn't have to go do the hard work, they didn't have to do some of those things, and so they don't have as much to offer down the line. They get their 15 minutes of fame, and then they're out because they don't have the substance to back that up in many cases. And you got to make sure that you build that substance. I'm not poo-pooing anybody that wants to get on TV or has the talent and knowledge to be able to do that.
Sure.
But showing your willingness to work hard, having things on your resume and your background, like block walking, like the opposition research, the things that that the people in our line of work, we look at those and we know that, hey, if you spent 6 months doing courthouse records research on opposition research, or you did a year doing block walking for some campaign, that tells me you're a pretty darn hard worker, right? It tells you something about your character, and that's going to mean a lot when I'm looking at your resume, whatever it's for, whether it's communications or campaign management or consulting or, whatever it might be. So I highly recommend that folks don't skip on that. I mean, that's something that was drilled into me from very early in my life, and sounds like for you as well. Where can people find you online if they want to reach out about getting you some work for them, or got any questions, or somebody interested in getting started in this kind of work?
My website is www.capitalcityresearch.com, capital spelled with an O. You can also email me at willis@capitalcityresearch.com, or give us a call at 573-450-4895. Whichever method you wish to use, there's a place where you can fill out information on my website if you got questions, or you can email me or give me a call. We are very accessible, and we'll get right back with you if we don't pick up the phone right away.
Awesome. Well, Willis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and for being willing to share some of your advice. And just preemptively, thanks for being willing to answer folks' questions to reach out to you. Guys, we'll have all of Willis's contact information in the show notes. That was Thor, my wonder dog in the background, flapping his ears. And it's time for us to head out and go take a walk. So we're going to wrap up the podcast, and I look forward to talking to you guys again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.